kind of without further ado, I'll hand you over to Jim. He'll obviously do a better job of myself in introducing him. Yeah, we can get this started.
Yeah. So thank you for having me in your intimate group that has met multiple times, is my understanding. And it's a privilege, and I'm excited to be part of this. The first question that sort of came up for me when Richard and I were talking was, is there really, I mean, the topic is the rise of the CPTO. Is there, for you all, have you seen anecdotal or any, metric-based evidence that it's actually true? The CPTO is, is a role that is emerging more and more. Yeah.
At least, I mean, I've got a sample size of n equals 1, but in my case, it is looking that way, right? So at our company, so basically, we used to have a CPO, but he will leave us due to various reasons, and it's a health tech company. So we're looking for a chief medical officer, and the question is how to divide the product role. Should it be part of the medical or part of the technical officer, right? So myself. And this is something that we're discussing right now, and it's probably going to be a CPTO setup because it's hard enough to find a chief medical officer, especially for full-time. So it's best to keep the responsibility as low as possible.
And in your situation, is the chief medical officer a subject matter expert and a technology expert? So is it more like a SME and a CTO, or is there a CTO, CMO, CPO as well, or was it that way before?
No. They used to be a CPO, but no CMO. And the idea is that we want to, since we want to go to the more medical direction, we definitely need a CMO. We haven't got one yet. So we're looking for a CMO, and since it's really tough to find one, if it's not a co-founder, right? So it's a really, really hard task. Mm-hmm. And especially for full-time, the idea is that probably it makes more sense to have a part-time CMO, maybe 1 or 2 days a week, and then I would take care of the product role.
Interesting. Okay. Anybody else?
Originally, at Doctorly, before I joined, they were looking for people, and there were people in the application process who were saying, no, I don't want the technology role, the product role. I'll do it, but only if I can do everything. So I've seen that, and I've been in a few other discussions where some people have this role and want it. I guess it's something a few years ago, it wasn't something that was really talked about, didn't really come up that much. So I think there has been a change somewhere along the way where people find this more acceptable. But again, it's also low sample size.
Do they explain why they want to do everything?
They felt that,
or
for someone who didn't get my job.
Sorry, I was just asking because, you said, they were explaining that they do. I don't want to interfere like this. Sorry.
No, it's a valid question. I think the reasons that person had said was that they wanted to have control over the whole process. And I think that there's this angst amongst people where they say, working with somebody else is hard. So if I do everything, then I don't have to argue with anybody about stuff, and I don't have to have this product tech divide feeling. But I don't think you need to have that if you have separate people, as long as you're compatible and work well in a good way. Yeah. So I think that some of these people have their own opinion. They want to have this opinion. They want to set this through and leave their mark on stuff. But I think that this may also be because they have bad experience working with others, or have had difficulty finding alignment between the two sides. And not all technological people are easy to work with, and not all product people are easy to work with, right?
So what I've heard so far is, is it true that you all feel that there is this inevitable rise? So whether it's situational or, it's purely because it's situational, that it's inevitable that this is something that has existed and will continue to exist? Is that what I'm hearing? Because, for example, I heard here that it's based on need of the organism, the superorganism, the company, as well as whom we can get, right? What can we get to match that, need? And so some people are unwilling to take on certain roles or risks, and others want all of it because it's just easier to execute. Is that a fair statement?
I think so, but I don't personally. I'm against this putting all your eggs in one head basket thing. I don't see how one person can be good across such a huge spectrum. Now,
Indeed.
it's a massive amount of stuff, and it depends, like, how deep is your technology, how broad is your product. We're doing medical stuff as well, and like the amount of regulation and the amount of like paperwork and other stuff that has to come into this, that comes in through product in the form of requirements, is simply immense. And dealing with like a bunch of technological stuff and a bunch of this other stuff. I did it for a few months at the start here because the CPTO wasn't here then. We hired him after me, and it's just brutally.
There's an aspect of what the organization structured like as well. So it's like what the C and the O in the title do as well. Because if you have a management team where, all of a sudden, like we're coming from a situation where we had a CTO, CPO, and CDO, D for design. And frankly, you had 3 people with very strong opinions about the product and no clear division of responsibility and overlap and underlap. So we've kind of rationalized now. And so I've said, no, I don't want to be CTPO. I'm CTO, but I have everybody kind of under me. But I'm not telling the product people how to be product people in the same way that I don't tell some random engineer how to do their job either. It's much more than you have a coordinating function to ensure that everybody's kind of working and working to good metrics. So you can always be a decision maker of last choice, but really you want to enable your people to make the choices.
But I have a question here. In a world where we start to get more and more data driven and like build our opinions based on the data that we get, and this and product becomes less of a I'm the visionary and more of like I'm the discovery, or like the explorer of the field, and then working with the data that you get out of this exploration, is this strong opinion thing still a blocker? Because if you go with data and look at the stuff and say like, okay, we did this, we tried that, and here's the data, then usually there comes some conclusion that the next thing that you want to try, and if that is based on rational stuff and not on like, but I want to have it that way, that's usually an easy conclusion to say, okay, then let's try this and let's look how the data goes there, and then we try the next thing. And while that you do discovery, what I experienced is, and that's why I see this role kind of like as a bit with fear, is that very often with people that I talk that are like, we're in favor of this role, is we're not that good product managers that wanted to gain control. And they were like, they're not doing what I say. They're not doing what I want. And that's why I need to take control over tech too. So that they finally start doing what I do. And then you see tickets that are like defined down to the name of the field by product, and think like, okay, we're all trying to go into this like independent teams that have ownership of their domain and thrive by themselves and take a topic and do something that, and on the other hand, we're trying to get into a position where one guy decides everything because he wants control. And that's what I fear in that position, and where I usually see this kind of like friction between tech and product as a good thing. Because if you come more from product, I often see this, then technical debt is, no, we need features. And 2 years later, the source code is a mess because no one thought ever about tech. While on the other hand, if you only have tech, it's sometimes that is kind of like, it goes into this architectural jamboree and
academic.
And over engineering of like, we have a Kubernetes cluster for 5 users. I really love that friction in between where those two have to argue about it, like find the best solution for the customer. But it, as said, it depends a bit on like this. Is this about strong opinions, or is this about working together for a common goal?
So Florian, are you saying, I want to paraphrase back to you a little bit, are you saying that it's better to have, or maybe it's differently said, it's rare to find somebody who can be a CPTO and preserve that tension between that healthy tension between product and engineering, and wear both those hats at the same time? And so you're saying that having 2 people there is a valuable function as long as they're aligned on mission. Is that what I'm hearing?
It's already rare to find a really good product manager that works in an agile way. Yeah, and if fair. I now want to have one that also like is very, very, very proficient in tech, that's a unicorn.
Yeah, that's true.
I think that, I mean, this is also an interesting question that is raised by what you're saying. So which situation is what you encounter more often? So is it a tech person who has to take control of product due to whichever reason, or is it rather a product person who takes control of tech, right? So by myself being CTO, I would imagine like no product person can fulfill the CTO role. Probably every CPO would say the same thing about myself trying to double into product.
I wouldn't say that.
Disagree, because I always say my job is to make myself useless. So if I empower my if I empower my teams good enough and give them the opportunity to lead and like learn the thing and learn what the product needs and what the customer needs, I have less and less things to do and think more about strategic ways and less about this daily business. In a situation like this, I can imagine that a CPTO could work, but that means that you have to really follow this ownership approach. And that's where 90% of all the companies that I see struggle tremendously into giving away this kind of like responsibility. There's always this kind of like, the moment there is some problem, the old control mechanism grabs in and tries to get back to it. And this is where I think in these situations, usually you have to split the work because it's so much to do to first get into this mode and get into this gear.
Well, probably the only way to actually be a successful CPTO is to have a really strong product owner, a senior product owner, and a senior tech lead, right? So you basically have to recreate the friction that you just mentioned, Florian, which is very healthy also in my opinion. In my experience, it's absolutely, so I always loved it to have a strong CPO with whom I can fight, right? So the CPO tells me what he wants and I tell him what is possible and we have to somehow meet in the middle.
Yeah.
I think without this friction, it's very hard because it's going to be lopsided.
Yes.
Question: Do you feel that that the role of the CPTO, the singular person, and it could be, Martin, what you were saying, that if they hire well and they get that balance in their team, do you feel that it's I know the answer is going to be yes, but that it's situational, meaning that, for example,
Yes.
if there's a well, I want to give a specific example. So for example, if you're in a company that's sort of growing healthily, right, a growth company, and it's you're printing money, it's good, you got product market fit, you're cranking, and you just want to get more optimal discovery and delivery, versus you're going through a knothole, right, replatforming, or you got a pivot, or wherever it's super tactical, subject to an overall strategy, but it's like super, get it done, get through that knothole, get through that transition, that inflection point. Is there, for you guys, is there a difference between the two? One is a sort of a healthily growing company, the other one is the one that's pivoting or struggling in some way. Does it make sense what I'm asking?
At least this is what I perceived, right? So I've played the role or tried to fulfill the role of a CTPO, especially in situations where there was a lot of change and also we were understaffed. So somebody just had to step up and take the responsibility and make the decisions, and then the team grew. And at some point in time, I couldn't support all of those roles as well as I wanted. So we hired experts, and then we could grow again. But also I do believe, in the end, I don't think that it even really matters whether you have those roles combined or not, as long as you make sure that you provide values to your customers, right? And so this is in the end the measure of success. And so of course your organizational setup always needs to be an answer to the issues that you have, to the challenges that you have as an organization. But Jim, in the beginning of the meeting, you asked if you see a trend or something like that.
That's right.
So there is, of course, one. I've reflected about this for the last 5 minutes. That there is a trend that I see, because I believe, let's say 20 years ago, 30 years ago, nobody really would have discussed putting an IT manager, a tech expert, up for business and product work, or vice versa. So that we even can discuss this, or that we even have this now and then, a CTPO kind of person means, damn, we did a great job of connecting the dots, tech people thinking business and product people at least having some understanding of technology. That's progress.
One question here, but it's not called CTPO, it's called CPTO.
I don't know what it's called.
No, because we're sitting here in a round of CTOs, and that's like we have the knowledge. When I talk to product owners, I get this from the other side far more often, that the P's want to get the T, while I get it much less often from the T's that they actually want to do product. It's like,
that's interesting.
CPIO?
Well,
but like,
I have that as a topic a little bit later. I'd like to talk about that a little bit, if that's
Okay.
okay. So Martin, I think you had something there.
Yes,
Yeah?
I think so. So to understand like in which direction the shift goes is, and also like why we're suddenly talking about it, probably we have to also have a look at the companies where this position exists. And I would conjecture that many of them have a tech-related product, right? So ourselves, for example, so our product is an SDK. If you look at any development-related company, I don't know, Stripe or something, I could imagine that there it does make sense, right? If your product is, I don't know, something mundane, something nothing with computers, then it's probably not so easy to combine the roles.
Maybe a provocative observation. So my perception, I'm not a native European or native UK, is that the role of product, I mean, the role of product's been around for many, many years in many contexts. That said, the sort of modern incarnation is, you know, the whole agile movement is like 20 years old, right? And so it's just established practice in the United States, for example, and has been for some time. And the embracing of the CTO and the CPO and these roles, there's a lot of talent and so forth, people that have been trained and so forth. And my perception coming over here, because when I came over, the product wasn't even, 8 years ago, was not that is big, right? In big companies and small companies. And it was largely, this is sample n=1, right? So it was more business to engineering, and the tension was there. So certainly my question to you is the role of CPO or product managers in general, or product owners, depending on what nomenclature is adopted, certainly seems to be rising. Is that true here? I mean, notwithstanding the CPTO, or maybe the CPTO is more unique to Europe because of the nature of the talent market, or how companies evolved here, et cetera, et cetera. Does it make sense?
Yeah, I think
there's a truth in that too, and that certainly in Germany, and I've been working in Germany for like 20 years or so now. And there wasn't this culture of product owners. They didn't have it. We didn't have that in a lot of business where I've been, smaller business, larger business. We had project managers, but we didn't have product owners.
Yeah, precisely. Precisely.
And that leads to a position where if you don't have product owners who can at some point grow up to potentially be a CPO, like you have less talent there that can fulfill this role, leads to a scarcity, and that leads to people doing weird things like marrying a bunch of roles that maybe don't need to be married, because they realize we need somebody who's going to have product vision. We need somebody who's going to deal with like the market side as well as the tech side. And they look around and go, they've all got jobs, none of them want to move. What am I going to do? I still need somebody to take care of it. Here, you do this too. And one of the questions that right at the start, somebody mentioned, look, we're looking for a chief medical officer. We're going to have him for a couple of days a week. So I'm going to take on the role as CTPO because that needs to be filled. But it's like, do you have 3 days spare a week that you can dedicate that time, or like where is that going to come from? Like, I'm presuming you right now have a full-time job. So where's the P going to come from when you do that extra product stuff? And what are you not going to do, and where's that going to go? That was it came up very early on, but I think that for me that's a very interesting decision. When people decide to do this, if they're going to do both, they need to understand that they're two full-time jobs potentially, depending on the size of your organization, your product. Where's the time going to come from, and what things are you now no longer going to do? You get more done in 80 hours than you do in 40.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this only works if you delegate. If you've got good senior people from both the product and tech sides that report to you, and that's so, as I mentioned before, we can also recreate the friction necessary, or like the contradictions that have to be resolved. But otherwise, I think it's impossible to do that job, and especially family and also other stuff to do. It's very hard, I believe.
But doesn't that mean then that if you do the CPTO role, if you combine this thing, and it only works because you've got great people under you doing separate things, then the combined role of CPTO is maybe just a gap filler. It's not the thing that we're striving for. So we're doing because there's no other choice at that moment.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if the product is so tech related, it absolutely makes sense. You know, like, well, I mean, I mentioned Stripe before, which is a company or segment, like founded by engineers, and everybody's an engineer. So I think in such a company, it can make sense. In many other cases, I guess that this is due to a necessity. So also in our case, right? So it's like due to resource limitation, financial constraints, it's hard to find somebody.
Yeah.
And yeah, this is, in our case, it's definitely the case. You're right.
And to be honest, like I work mainly in the startup industry, and for me it was always somehow connected, even when you don't have this kind of title of CPTO or CTPO. Like the technology people were anyways very much connected to product. I see that also in other directions. Like we had roles where one person was responsible for the marketing and the sales part, because these two different kind of functions are somehow connected. And I see that for startups, especially for startups in the tech industry, for SaaS products and stuff like this, also very much connected. Similar like you, Martin, what we're saying, like it is very connected to the technology part.
Yes.
If the product is a technology product, then it makes sense. Imagine you would be the CPO of a big corporate for beverages, for cans with drinks inside of that. Is it necessary to be at the same time the technology person? And I think for small companies, especially for startups, it makes sense if you have one person who can do that. But on the other side, I can fully understand, Florian, that it's pretty unique to find these people. But you can streamline the decisions. You can decide, okay, do you need to do refactoring, or do you do now a product feature? And you don't need to discuss this with someone who doesn't understand these both worlds.
The question is, do you get a good decision if you streamline them or not? And I question that outcome, because these are great people, and I understand that they're probably like, people who do this, it's fantastic, but if you don't have a sparring partner as your equal on the same level, that you can't like have this discussion. You don't have to even disagree. Like I work with a CPO now, we share a room, we do everything together. We agree on some things, we disagree on some things, but we're doing stuff together. And that makes for a very powerful combination. I'm in a lucky situation that I've got that.
If you're a good team of two, right? I mean,
Yes.
it can also lead to foul compromises all the time. So I think I don't see that. But the one thing that I wanted to share, because I said I had this combined role, and there was a breaking point for me. And that breaking point was actually not that I felt like I cannot be the expert in product and tech, though we have a really product and not a tech product in our company. It was when I felt that I was doing a poor job for the product managers and providing career paths for them and people growth, because I didn't have any experience in being a product manager ever and doing UX research and having domain knowledge. And so I could not grow them, and I failed them. And this is when I decided we really need me to stop doing product. We need a product person, a senior product person.
So I want, could I go back to payment? What you were describing about, in some cases, there were engineers who sort of had business. Were you describing them as they were sort of pseudo product people already, because people were hiring engineers with subject matter expertise in the business space, the business domain as well, and so that was just a necessity when we didn't have a product role. Let's call it.
Yeah, like
product role.
It was a cross-functional team, so it was very connected to the business, and it was for everyone clear, okay, what kind of product we need to build. And it makes sense for startups. And to be honest, and Jörg, I have to disagree with you. I'm sorry for that, but even when I look at big CEOs like the Alphabet CEO, these people are engineers, or it is a title, but these are originally CTOs, which are now CEOs.
That's in Germany so super uncommon to have that.
That's true.
If you look at how our startup industry works, it's usually the business guy, the marketing guy, and then the one with the glasses that is in the back of the picture.
But if you look at traditional German industry, like Siemens and all these
That's
big
different.
companies, they're
Engineers.
all the CEOs are former engineers. So
Yes, that's different. But like in the startup industry, we have this guy that knows the business, we have the guy that knows marketing, and then they get some engineer that does this stuff. And even for these tech companies, it takes some time for them to really appreciate that this has value, and we're not good at this. I remember when we were at BCG, Digital Ventures, the discussion of who is allowed to lead a project was a huge one, and it was always engineers are not allowed to do it because they don't know business. And I think that in this relationship between T and P, yeah, exactly. So in this, it helps each role if she understands the others. If they understand the others, because it makes these decisions to come to a common conclusion so much easier because each one understands them. But none of them has to be expert in the other's field, but they have to understand them. And that's exactly what we want to go in, what cross-functional teams try to do. They have a product manager, they have engineers, and they both together try to discover what the customer wants. Not one solely, but one leads this area of like, I know how research works, but we look at it together so that we make conclusions together. And this is
so Florian, do you mean in the opposite of taking orders, not taking orders, but you know, being a service bureau for the business, for marketing or for sales kind of thing? Is that what you're saying? Instead of?
If we go to Marty Keegan says, we give them problems and see what amazing solutions they come up with these cross-functional teams of like designers, engineers, and product managers in these small teams that own their domain.
Well, I think that the challenge there may be, and this is for everybody, certainly if I'm a founder and I'm a subject matter expert and I'm a rainmaker and I'm out there selling, and I feel like I can't hire a product person or a technology person who understands my business like I do, right? You got to trust, because they'll always say, I trust my gut, my algorithms, my experience, that kind of stuff. I know what the market needs. And so there is a lot of inertia, maybe, to getting them to believe that these sort of modern product practices are better than my gut. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Which is very funny, because all those founders need to convince a lot of investors about their business ideas and business models. So they need to be experts in explaining how things work and making others believe. Yeah. So I get the idea, right? But there's also one more thing. I from personal experience, it's a small number of people and I really love them, but the founders I work with, they don't understand technology. They just don't. The best I could get with them is make them understand that they don't understand it. And that's good enough, right? But this is and it leads to a situation where they have this product idea and the business model and all that's fair enough and all that's complicated enough, and then they believe technology will be the easiest part of it. That will be easy. It just has to be done. And this is where they underestimate, and this is why they hire CTOs very late in the process, right?
So that's actually a good segue. I have another question. Was this Johannes? I was going to actually call on you.
Yes.
So maybe you can say that what you're going to say and then field the question I was just going to ask, because there are some that would say that the rise of the CPO or the product person, and including the CPTO, the function of product, is largely driven in the EU and UK by this massive influx of VC money or private equity money into startups and so forth. So I was wondering, after you give the comment you were going to give, Johannes, if you could or anybody else pop in after that. Yeah.
Sure. So I want to quickly give my context of what I'm doing right now. I'm the technical co-founder of a business. We both are the co-CEOs. So obviously I'm kind of the CPTO as well. And I think what's really interesting is earlier we were always talking about two things. One was the tech people are not the CEOs, and in Europe most of the time. And the other thing was, now we were saying, and the CEOs do not understand tech. But I think the root cause of, the engineer doesn't understand the business is actually, there's some truth to that, in the sense that there are very few CTOs that I've seen in Europe in particular that were very happy to go on to sales calls, that were very happy to meet clients. And if you don't understand your users' problems, then it's right that you're just a tech guy in the background. You need to speak to your users to have that CTPO role to really understand both tech and product, what the user needs. If you don't talk to users, just the second-hand information that you're getting from the people who do talk to your users isn't good enough for you to lead the product organization, I would say.
I can come back to the VC question if anybody wants to comment on that.
I'd fully agree. And I think it's kind of depends on what kind of organization and also what kind of CTO you are. If you're just the chief engineer, then absolutely keep away from customers and don't go anywhere near product. But if you're actively engaged in finding big customers and talking to investors and bringing money into the business, if you charge your people, make smart business decisions when you make your tech choices, if you're running that kind of organization, then you're close to the business. But if you're just the guy who's fastest on the command line, then yeah, stay where you are. I think it depends very much the type of person, the type of role, and the type of organization. I'm sure if we summarized our companies, we're all as radically different as could be. So
You think the fastest command line guy should be the CTO? He should be the senior engineer because he's the fastest guy there.
Yeah. No, he shouldn't be managing. He shouldn't be chief of anything. He should just be underserved.
But don't Peter Pan him away from his job.
Just on that, and we have that exact situation. So I came to Doctorly. They have a CTO. I'm the chief digital officer because one of the founders is already CTO. But he's a great guy, fantastic engineer, super awesome technical ideas. Can't lead people for buckets. And is no good like doing anything on the product side. He realized that. He decided, okay, as well as the other founders, they said, okay, I'm not good at this. I don't want to do it. We're going to get somebody else in. I didn't want to take the title away from him, so I've got chief digital officer. I don't really give a toss, but I'm responsible for the entire development organization. This was something that had to be realized. He did it for 3 years. And they nearly ran the place into the ground, not just because of him, but they didn't have a product person. They had a chief technology officer who wasn't good with people, and it really was very, very painful. And so when I came in as somebody who has this experience of leading people and building teams and growing organizations and all of this kind of stuff, they were kind of like, wow, that's pretty cool. And then we hired a CPO as well, and that gave us the next level.
Question there, how much do you know about the origin story of that epiphany? Was it driven by investors?
Pain,
was it
driven by pain.
So it was pure pain, and it was pure self-enlightenment, essentially, or self-actualization. Is that
maybe some of the investors?
Because it's a pretty common story, right? I mean, that's a pretty common story that founders who are good at one thing.
Yeah, and I think here it really was that the founding team realized at some point last year that actually things are not going the way we wanted, and they took a very hard look at it, and they realized, what are we good at, what are we not good at? We've got the CEO he's a great salesperson, he's out like making money like nothing. We've got a great COO who's doing like the whole organizational craft, but the technology and product sides were missing. When I got here, my engineers were like, we don't understand these requirements from product. I'm like, well, when did you talk about it? I'm like, we didn't. They were not talking. They were just shuffling bits of paper or Confluence or whatever across to each other.
Maybe back to the VC question a little bit. We all know that the money people have influence. Sometimes it's unwanted. Sometimes it's useful. Johannes, back to you. I mean, you're a co-founder, right? Do you feel that the influx of VC, so much capital flowing into Europe and UK now? I mean, it's been happening for decades and decades in the startup community in the United States, and it's just there's been this it's just jacked here. This is my perception. I don't know if it's the same with you all. Do you feel that there's any influence in the rise of the product role coming from actual money people as opposed to this sort of organic self-enlightenment, or company self-enlightenment, or founder self-enlightenment, or et cetera, et cetera? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
I think it does make sense, because you do tend to, have ongoing conversations with your investors, and they, and if there's any gaps in what you're providing and what is being requested from that side, well, you do try to fill it, and you do try to then fill the executive role in the end if that's necessary. But honestly, to really answer your question, I have no clue. I've never thought about it that way, and I do think it's a very interesting connection that you're making. Like that could very well be.
Do others have an opinion there?
I just thought about that. Yes, I think it's a yes and a no. So if I compare the situation now with the money flooding into the market to like ages ago, where people would start tinkering in their garage until they have a product and it's working, it's far, much more from like an engineering point of view, closer to what we call a CTO kind of person right now. And then they would try to go to market with that through a shop or through whatever, right? And then build the empire from there. So this is tech leadership, basically, or tech led. Where now, when you have VCs, the people they fund are the people selling ideas to the VCs. And to sell an idea, you need a slide deck and a good idea, right? And this is all, I don't want to talk it down. It's really also work and visionary work and things like that. But this is enough to get the investment round, the first round at least. At some point in time, you need to deliver something. But for the first round,
let's be a little provocative there. That it's happening at all levels. Right, there's a ton of growth capital as well, coming in. This is already product market fit, et cetera, and they don't have a CPO. They don't have even any product function, right? I mean, Raisin's an example. Raisin was growing like a weed. The company that I'm currently CPO at, it was basically business to tech, and it was more what I think Florian and Jack were describing. It was more project management than product what I would consider classic product management. But it was already a successful company. I mean, Marcus is here. He was here before. He works for the same company I do. He's here with us. So I'm just, I'm wondering, because I personally do believe that there is a rise of the P in Europe and the UK. There's no question. And maybe whether it's CPTO or that kind of thing, I guess I'm wondering aloud, and there's no real, I can't prove it, or neither can we, but I'm wondering about your experience. Is it coming from external forces versus the self-enlightenment that was being described and saying pain, and I got to have that thing, because maybe they don't even know about that product role, where VCs are often, or private equity, et cetera, growth capital, are investing across the world, and they have a pretty big sample, you know what I mean, of what they're seeing.
Now I really have a strong feeling based on what Frank just said, because my experience was not that it was easy to get money based on an idea. My experience was that show some traction, almost doesn't matter how little, show some traction and then you get the money was the very clear requirement. So I feel like, and now connecting that to what Jim's saying, with some traction, you're starting to get a lot of money and you're starting to get into a growth phase, and you're maybe even going into marketing at a phase where you're not fully clear yet on product market fit, and you're just pushing into a somewhat working product, and at a somewhat more grown up stage. My understanding is that that's also when you joined your company yourself, Jim, at a more mature stage, you're suddenly realizing, well, we are growing our user base, but our product isn't fully there yet. Let's have someone really put on the product hat properly. And then you're at that stage. So like you need an executive role to really give it that weight and move from just project managing, let's do this little thing here, this little thing there, to product managing on, well, what are our users' needs overall, and doing that customer research. I want to say again, where you started off with an intuition, now you need to actually validate to move forward properly.
Question, isn't that something that starts right after your MVP creates traction? So you start, you have an idea, this like hypothesis, you validate it to get some traction, and then you need to understand what your user really wants and where to go.
Well, if you have a lot of money, and that's the case right now, then you can put a lot of marketing onto that and you get some traction just because of the amount of money. That's my theory.
Yeah, I just wanted to relate to your initial question, Jim, right? So if this is impacting, I think in general, right? So from my experience, I founded a couple of companies also and worked with many VCs. I think in general, venture capital and private equity is impacting what you are doing in the startup, right? So if you want the VC money, it's not about the question of product role or technical role, right? So let's imagine there are many stages of the startups, as we all know, right? So let's imagine you are raising money on the PowerPoint. So what usually is venture capital is looking, right? So obviously the idea is important and so on, but they are looking for a team. right? So, and venture capitals, especially the good ones on the market, they're pretty experienced with knowing which roles exactly you need for this type of startup. And it's simple as it is, right? So if you are, for example, not technical product, right? So you are building really, let's call it product, right? So then obviously the request of VC would be, okay, so who is taking the product role, right? So on the C level, on the founder level, right? So if you are rising in the beginning. And obviously it has an impact, right? So because it will be one of the check marks on the VC list, right? So that will require somebody to step in to become a lead product, right? So whether it's one of the founders, whether it's one of the hired person, right? So, but it's, I think it's, yes, it has an impact. Regarding one more thing, right? So somebody mentioned, like there are a lot of interesting thoughts here, I must say. So somebody mentioned actually, you know, this idea of in Germany, right? So usually, let's call it the business guys, right? So becoming CEO and so on, right? So, for example, I'm in Germany only 5 and 6 years, and before I was building startups in Israel, right? So for many years, and I also must say that there is a big difference, right? So. In Israel was one of the biggest, as far as I remember, don't remember if the biggest, but one of the biggest countries where by amount of venture capitals per capita or per startup, something like this, right? So, and actually because of the nature of the Israel, there are a lot of companies which are tech driven. With the market going to US, B2B startups, a lot of CEOs actually technical guys, right? So they are not business guys. It's actually opposite from what is happening in Germany. And I agree, in Germany, it's kind of a tradition, right? So that you are going to the business track and then probably you will talk to the, as a sales representative, right? So, and not opposite. But about VC, yes, I think it has an impact, right? And it always had, right? So now it's just more, I think it's more grown, right? So more mature because also VCs, gain a lot of experience, right? So not like US market is slightly different from the European market, right? So now it's coming more and more to European market and they learn and they do demand such things. So yeah, this would be my 5 cents.
Yeah, just like want to add, so from my perspective, like this CTPO, like Raisin the CTPO, it's like not a new topic. It's not a revolution. It's just about the title. Yeah, I would say from my perspective, because like in the past, I was working in a lot of different companies. Like at some point, CTO was responsible for the product, but it was CTO role, and who like Dmitry mentioned that. So someone from C level should taking care of the product, yeah, and basically inside of the company and with investors was aligned that CTO will take care of the product persons. And at the other company, for example, in my previous company, there was no CTO role at all, so it was just CPO, but CPO was responsible for the engineering teams. And basically, he was driving more like a product organization, I would say. So it was not really tech organization, but more like a product oriented. And yeah, so I see this that basically it's just about how to say that more and more companies are requesting how to say maybe like aligning this like structure of the company where CTPO officially responsible for the whole direction, yeah. But generally for the startups, I think it's by default most of the time, yeah. That's when CTO is coming, so he's driving the product, yeah. At least like for the early stages, and later there is some division or some other structure. But I would say it's nothing new, to be honest, like for me.
I agree with you, especially that this is a label. It is a label, but I think also it's important sometimes to create some kind of new label so that people know, okay, this person is responsible for the product and the technology. And on the other side, like when we think about the topic, let's forget about the label, but what are the tasks of this person? Okay, and this is much more important for me. If this person is responsible for creating the product and it's a technical product, awesome if he has technical knowledge. And if it's not the case, then it might be tricky. So for me, it's more interesting to think about, okay, is that person able to create the strategy for a product and at the same time for the technology? If that is possible, yes, why not? Why shouldn't
And presumably payment that, you know, whoever's leading the engineering team has subject matter expertise in the business we're going into too, right? To be able to translate that appropriately into.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. Does anybody here, I'm curious, as a bit of an aside, believe in, trust, whatever, domain-driven design? Is that a thing that's common? Or, I mean, because the intention of domain-driven design is to model the business so that we can build it into, is that anybody here use that technique at all? Domain storytelling? That's funny.
We
Well,
do it here. We don't do it particularly well yet, but it's new this year, so you know. But it's everybody wants to do it, and we're fighting our way through. Like, how do we do this now and do all the other things that people want of us? So it's an organizational change process.
well, I can do an ad. I can do an advertisement. I get nothing off of this for a guy named Henning Schwentner. Do you know him? He wrote Domain Storytelling. You know,
I know the
book
book
just came out, and he's pretty brilliant at helping companies do that, because what he does is he gets the business and engineering and product together to do that. You mentioned there's a difference between migrating a CPO taking on the CPTO role, taking on engineering essentially, versus the CTO taking on this the product role. Do you feel there's any difference between that path? I mean, I know you're going to say it depends on the human, depends on the person, right? And their adeptness to be able to live both of those hats. But let's presume that somebody has, you know, like the technology person is a product-oriented technology person, the product person is a reasonably skilled, you know, comes from a technology background, essentially. For a minute.
Let me start off with a provocative and arrogant answer. So maybe that's well perceived, maybe not. So I believe if you are a technical person and you have a solid technical education, which means that you can think in structures and models to a certain degree, that then it is easier for you to learn the models and the structures of the business than the other way around. I believe for a person coming from a business and product background who never really had any engineering education, understanding technology to the degree where you would be a good CTO person too is harder. And I know that is unfair, but this is from the top of my mind.
I'd like to say it back to you. So you're saying that if there's an engineer that is trained formally and is a strong engineer and has deep understanding, broad understanding of, you know, different kinds of tech stacks and all the technologies that are necessary to power a modern fill in the blank business, that if they're curious, a good communicator, they're curious about the business, they're capable of conceptual thinking, you know, these things. And again, I'll go back to the good communicator, because I heard you sort of imply that they probably have an easier time taking on the P role than somebody who's a product person, you know, take on the nuances. And by the way, I can say this, 20 years ago, technology was simpler. I mean, you know, it just was. And now me just setting up my own development environment is like, it's like, holy.
Like creating a company.
it's unbelievable how complex it is. So does anybody else, how does anybody feel about Frank's bold, provocative statement there?
To a certain extent, I agree, but I think it's also one of these situations where there is a huge dependence. We have great engineers who are poor people. They can't do people. If you can't do people, you've got no.
Okay, so you're missing that one. So people, not just communication, not just a conceptual thinking, it's people leadership and people, you know,
you've got to be able to lead. You've got to be able to motivate. You've got to be able to like encourage your teams, look after them, and grow them. If you can't do that, you might still be highly successful as a purely technical person and be very respected because you have great technological knowledge and people put up with you to a certain extent. If you then try to step across into product, you will find this a void which you will fall into and not enjoy because it's not you. Because product really is all about people. Yes, we're doing products, but they're for people. We have to understand what they want.
You mean motivate and influence people as well as interpret what our customers want, kind of thing. Is that what you're saying?
I think on the product side, that's more important than it is sometimes in the technical side, because our engineers will sometimes, or developers, or whatever you want to call them, will sometimes accept the fact that an engineering leader is not a great people person because he's a great engineer or she's a great engineer. And that's a thing that I think on the product side is not acceptable. If you can't talk to your customers decently and you can't motivate people, you can't understand and they can't understand you, then you really as a product person or somebody doing the work of product are not in the right place. And that becomes much more apparent and there's much less tolerance on that side of it. I think what I've seen anyway.
I myself started as a product manager, then went into engineering, then people management. Now I have both roles. So I did it the other way around compared to what Frank said, but that's exactly why I agree with him. I think it's much easier for an engineer to pick up the product stuff. I did it with zero official training. After half a year, I was a somewhat decent product manager. It takes a lot longer to be a decent engineer and even longer to be a decent CTPO. And there's obviously also the part that Jörg mentioned about, yes, you need the people management skill to be a leader.
And payment, I think you had a comment you wanted to make, yeah?
Yeah, like I also agree with Frank and Johannes, and but I think still like the product role is pretty underestimated, because like when you take care of product, you have a lot of stuff to do. You're in the middle of everything. Like you have to even understand every department, like the marketing, you have to communicate to them how to sell the product, to the salespeople about the pricing. It's all connected to the product. So it's pretty intense. And so back to, I think, I don't know who exactly said that, but if you're really a CPTO or CTPO, I think it's pretty important that you have a strong technical lead there who supports you.
Collaborates with you. Yeah, Paul. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah.
But I wanted to say, I think so much of being a tech person is to actually have, you've come up through the ranks and you've lived through pain and agony to kind of get to where you're at, and kind of like having stared at thousands of lines of codes and debugged and gone through that pain means that you have an empathy and sympathize with people, even if your fingers have become soft. And I think that's the kind of, there's the kind of creds that you have there, which is hard to acquire if you didn't come up through that path as well. And I don't think it's necessarily to do with capability, but perhaps the creds that you get from the people as well, and the empathy. I mean, there's lots of hard jobs, and really a programmer is much easier than being a coal miner, I'm sure. But there is pain involved.
Well, we're all working at some kind of coal face, right?
Yeah.
Hey, Marcus, I'm going to call on you, right? So I know Marcus because we work together, and he's I'm going to brag about Marcus here, a very good engineering director at Raisin, and I would classify him as a very product oriented, understanding of the business and so forth. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, thanks, Jim, for the kind words. So I tend to what Jack said. So the whole people leadership in the end makes a huge difference, I think. So whatever role you're in, if it's the P or the T, without people management skills or leadership skills, you will fail in that or that direction, or you have at least a harder time. And yeah, I think why the product role is maybe a little bit underestimated today is because I think tech people tend to take over tasks which are often product related. At least from what I see, what we do at Raisin, Jim, is that we have a lot of tech people who are doing product things, but we also have a lot of product people who are doing tech things. So it's like, it's kind of mixed.
Yeah, well, I'd say we also have some business people doing some product and tech things too.
True that.
I guess it's also the curse of product, right? Because everybody would believe that with just some, common sense and some, good ideas, you can get into product easily. Whereas this is not the case with tech.
Well, it's interesting.
Also not the case with product.
Right. Absolutely.
Because
think, I guess.
Because I think one of these things, what I said, like this discovery phase where you like should have to go away from what you believe into what you get from the customer is one of the hardest things to do, because you have a strong belief. You usually are an advocate for your software and you think it should go that direction. And then your data comes back and tells you, no, it's here and here's your market. And then to have this kind of like self-esteem, or I don't know how to call it, to say, yeah, I'm wrong and we're going that way. That's one of the hardest things for product people too, and that's something that is really hard to learn.
I call that confidence in your humility. Right?
Yes.
So it's like you need to be still confident but humble, right? Kind of thing. So you can be curious and hear. Martin, you were going to say something?
Yeah, no, I just fully agree with Florian. So this is where I says that it's the curse of product. So of course, it's not the case that everybody can do it, but everybody thinks they can do it, right? So somebody also mentioned, yeah, in our company, like everybody dabbles a little bit in product, and also tech people have something, you know, they want to say something, and of course, because everybody's got an opinion. I just really want that everybody's like, oh no, this blue, it looks horrible.
That's why I like data so much.
I want to pose the question. So we've looked at the very top of the tree. We've gone, okay, can we put these two things together at the top? What happens if we in our minds put the two things together at the bottom of the tree, or the, you know, whichever way the tree is up? A back-end developer, should they be the product owner for the team and the back-end developer? Should the DevOps and the requirements engineer be the same person? So, eventually, if we're going to grow CTPOs, whatever, like, it has to start from somewhere. And do we think it's sensible to put those two things, or a combination of those two things, together at the very lowest level? And if all of us have a natural aversion to putting those two things together on the lowest level, why is that? And we find it acceptable at the highest level.
One thing there, I think as an engineer, you should understand the other side. It doesn't mean you have to do it or like be the person who's responsible, but you should know what the others are up to so that you understand it. And that makes a cross-functional team, which is in itself kind of like this idea of having both these mini companies for that specific part, domain, job function, however you cut it, be responsible for that as a team.
Yes, as a team. And so that group of people together does stuff, but the individual is never both.
No, and the product manager in that cross-functional team will not code. Probably.
So that goes back to the original question, right? It depends on who you can get to do the roles, doesn't it? I mean, you know,
you can't
for example,
get else.
So for example, we've committed to this, what we call the binary star model at Raisin, which at every level from CPTO and CTO down to the team, engineering lead, tech lead, you know, and the product owner. That's a self-similar structure. And, you know, but not all companies can afford that, right? So, or you may not find the right person, you know, the right curation of people. It just so happens that the CTO and myself get along, but if we didn't, it might be better for the business to collapse it into one. And I know for a fact that if I got abducted by aliens and taken to a pleasure planet somewhere, that, you know, our CTO would do a fine job being a CPTO, frankly, right? I think Marcus, you'd probably agree with that he's got unusual abilities in that realm. So it depends, doesn't it? I mean, so sometimes it goes back to our first topic, what you said before, your hypotheses that, you know, it depends on the situation, right? As to whether or not the CPTO is the right solution, or if you can get the really well curated CPO and CTO working together, or afford both of them, kind of thing. Is that true, or what I'm saying? That sort of.
I agree.
Yes, but if you think about like as a picture, this one-man band where he plays the drums, the flute, the thing and stuff, they sound good, but usually it sounds better if they're four. No question about it. Yeah. If they're well aligned.
That's super fun and engaging, and you know, I'd love to join future sessions if you do them together as well. Is there anything that anybody would like to say before we wrap up?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, pretty much said what I was going to say. Yeah, huge thanks, Jim. Really appreciate that.
Thank you.
I think it's great.
And thank you for being a brave CPO in CTO land.
Yeah, I was thinking that. Yeah, as you guys said, have a lovely evening, and yeah, thanks a lot for your time. It's always appreciated.